Welcome to The Reckoning. My name is Johnnie Ray Kornegay III, and I am honored to welcome you to our conversation. Before we begin, please be sure to subscribe to get more content from CNP. Also, follow us on social media at CNP Tribe on your favorite platform. We are honoring World AIDS Day on today's episode. World AIDS Day was first celebrated on December 1st, 1988, and it is an international day to raise awareness about HIV, combat HIV stigma, and remember lives lost. This year's theme is collective action, sustain and accelerate HIV progress. In our conversation, we will be discussing Black men, HIV, and hip hop, specifically golden era hip hop during the decade 1986 to 1996, a decade which found hip hop culture on the front lines of raising awareness about HIV. Joining me is Stephen Hicks. Stephen Hicks has been a public health advocate for more than 13 years, focusing on sexual health and harm reduction. He has served as a narrative justice fellow for us here at CNP, as well as a global health corps fellow. He serves as a consultant for Red Hot, the not-for-profit record label which has released classic compilation albums such as Red Hot and Blue, Red Hot and Rio, and one we're going to discuss tonight, America is Dying Slowly, in addition to 20 other projects. He is a writer with bylines in The Body Pro, The Huffington Post, Architect Magazine, and Vice. Stephen, welcome to The Reckoning. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I am doing real well. And thank you for agreeing to dive into this history with me a bit. We can't cover it all because it's a lot to cover, but we definitely wanted to lean into this idea of hip hop as a force for change. I think in the current space that we're in, hip hop is so the culture now. But during the time that we're kind of going to talk about, that was not the case. Hip hop was new still. It was despised by so many folks. And at the same time, there was this opportunity for like revolutionary messages to kind of happen in the music in a way that happens today, but sometimes it feels like there's so much noise we don't get a chance to hear it, right? But during 86 to 96, when this kind of decade, we're going to talk about a few songs, you had the opportunity to hear some stuff because it was like, you heard everything. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of out there. So thank you, man, for being willing to dive into this a bit. I have a question for you.
Sure.
For you, when did you recognize hip hop as a force for change in kind of your experience? I know when it was for me, and HIV has a lot to do with it, so I'll talk about that. But when did that happen for you?
I mean, I think it would be twofold. From a personal standpoint, I mean, just being captivated by the first rap songs I ever heard, whether it was Poor Righteous Teachers, Rock This Funky Joint, or, Chub Rock, Treat 'Em Right. Just like a lot of the name dropping that people would do, in our hearts and minds, never forget Yusef Hawkins. Yes, and I'm like, who is that? And
who is right?
Google, and then I think hip hop, I realized there was some sort of connection. And, I was born in 85, but I think as I was coming into a development of hip hop, I was still in middle school, or I was in middle school when I learned the words of self-destruction.
Yes.
Now, the song had predated middle school for me.
Yeah.
Probably came out when I was in preschool. But somehow, some way, I was introduced to self-destruction, and I learned all the parts. And, changing up my voice, and, you would like record the songs on VHS and play them when infomercials were playing in the morning. so you would have some music to, go to the bus stop with.
Yeah.
And I feel like hip hop had such an impact on me because I'm a kid in the suburbs of Virginia, and my parents are working in DC, and so I'm sort of insulated within suburbia in predominantly white spaces, but I'm introduced to hip hop and I'm able to see a world that my parents don't want me to see from a traumatic standpoint, but they want me to see so I can build up character. And so I think hip hop was giving me that gateway to expand my definition of blackness beyond what was in my household. And so it was giving me that creative artistic expression that was juxtaposed to my dad, who owned an art gallery, juxtaposed to my mom, who was active in her sorority, and just being able to see that hip hop was giving me a chance to express myself among the grown-ups. So even if they did not want me to express myself in that capacity, they at least appreciate it because we were touching on similar cultural touch points.
Yeah.
And so if Chuck D is talking about Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey, my parents are also talking about Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X.
Yes.
And so when Spike Lee is coming out with movies, then we all as a family, as a household, are connected just from different entry points.
Thank you so much for raising that idea of the intergenerational connection, because one of the things I absolutely love about hip hop as I've grown older is I recognize that through sampling and through these reference points, I was able to learn things from my parents' generation through the music that I was listening to. Yeah. And I love the fact that I felt like there was a through line for me. Of course, I didn't recognize it was happening at the time, right? I just knew that I was having this experience. And to your point, right? I literally learned the name Malcolm X by listening to Public Enemy, which then sent me to the encyclopedia. Right? I couldn't use the encyclopedia in my house because we had a 1969 World Book in the house that was, of course, 20 years dated by that point, right? So I had to go to the library. I had to look it up and learn who Malcolm X was, right? Because they weren't teaching Malcolm X in my school. So hip hop for you and for me acted as kind of this way to get education, to learn about who I was and about Black folks and Black culture, but also learn about things that were happening in the world. So we're talking about HIV tonight. So I've been very vocal about my entry point to HIV activism was literally through music. There is a direct through line in my HIV activism through music, right? So 1985, of course, I remember That's What Friends Are For. That became like a big deal for me, where I'm like, oh my goodness, there's like this, that song was, of course, used to fund AIDS research at the time. And what's dope, I didn't know this until later, but I put this song on the list because we're going to get to 86 in a second, or that decade in a second. There was a song that was released regionally in Philadelphia. And it was actually, so I ended up buying this. So I learned about this in a book. Dan Royal's book included this chapter about Philadelphia, right? And this song came up and I'm like, what in the world is this? They only printed like 500 of these, right? And it's this song called AIDS, so AIDS, and then the song was called Respect Yourself. And it was this song that was commissioned to raise awareness about HIV to Black men, right? So I actually had the opportunity to talk to the writer and producer of this song. And he was just talking about the fact that, it was just this interesting opportunity. They got this funding to be able to release a song. They wanted to try it. So back then, people were just kind of doing things and they knew that hip hop could be an entry point to have this conversation with black men. They wanted to raise awareness about HIV to black men, right? And they were like, well, let's try hip hop and see what happens. Um, and what I think is interesting about this song's existence is the fact that um it was a tool. It was a tool for learning. It didn't catch on, but it is now part of HIV movement history and hip hop history as this kind of early entry into
Yeah.
the conversation about HIV for black men. Now, did you know, had you heard about this song before?
No, I think if I had heard it or knew about it, it was like in passing,
Mhm.
but it's not one of those things where I'm like, I know definitively. But I would also say that I jokingly call him my cousin. He's not my cousin. We actually haven't met, but John Liberator, out of Philly, like a Philly hip hop historian, just music,
I
you
need to
know,
know. I don't know, John. Okay, awesome.
yeah.
Cool.
And he writes liner notes for a lot of albums, and he's just like very highly regarded.
Mhm.
He probably mentioned it, but
Yeah.
sometimes things move in passing.
Yes.
But to me, that's just like an amazing story, and just going back to further prove the the force, the power of hip hop, of
Mhm.
messaging, especially when you think about Philly hip hop, because we talk about like Steady B, Cool
Schoolie
C,
D. Yeah.
PSK,
Yeah.
Three Times Dope,
Yeah.
Will Smith,
Hmm.
Jazzy Jeff, Muhammadiyah, got to give her
Yeah.
props.
Absolutely.
Uh, but sometimes things kind of get lost in the
Mhm.
sauce, and
Yeah.
it's good that you're bringing it up. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. And I do want to talk about one of the things that I found in going back and listening to some of the songs that we're going to discuss is the idea of protection, right? Um and no one and we're going to talk about Jimmy right now. So we're going to move into one I absolutely remember when By All Means Necessary came out. My cousin had the tape, and it was just like my joint, and my philosophy was just like mind blowing
Yeah,
as a song to me.
yeah,
But of course there was this other song on this record called Jimmy, which the idea, I love how vernacular kind of evolves, the idea of the Jimmy hat, right? As a slang term for condom. But Jimmy becomes this super important song in the conversation around HIV because one is KRS-One, who's
yeah.
at the top of his superpowers at that time, and is including this catchy song that also is informing men about the importance of condom use. And I remember it being just like, oh yeah, see, Chris is rapping about HIV too.
Yep.
We have to let folks know. Jimmy, uh, do you remember when you first became aware of that tune? Because you would have been 3 for real, so it would have been later when you became aware of Jimmy. What's your reflection on that song?
Okay, so my introduction to Jimmy was um probably a reference through J. Rue the Damager,
Yes.
from You're Playing Yourself from the
Mhm.
second album, The Wrath of the Math.
Yes.
But then the music mogul that we won't mention reworked
He did.
the chorus. And then one day I'm listening to the oldies but goodies rap station, and they're playing Jimmy. And I'm like,
Mhm.
wait, that sounds familiar. And I'm just like
Yes.
paying attention. And the music nerd in me wanted to like call up my old babysitter, rest in peace, Miss Katrina, because my babysitter was like introducing us to a lot of this, but you just didn't know, you didn't have credits. You were just like, you were rolling with your babysitter and she's playing all this music.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fascinating if you look at the long, prolific, and even complicated legacy of KRS-One. on the first album, Criminal Minded, you have what, Super Ho, and you have the
Yes.
P is Free.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then the next album, before the album is released, Scott LaRock, his partner is his
He's
music
murdered.
partner is
Mm-hmm.
killed, and who was a social worker. So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to think about like what Scott LaRock was like dealing with when it came to like HIV, public health, and all the dimensions of working in the Bronx.
Yes.
But I was just thinking about the continuation or the continuum of KRS-One and his discography. When you think about, okay, you go from what was on Criminal Minded to what was on the second album, and he's bringing Jimmy to the forefront. Catchy
Mm-hmm.
is the teacher. He's at his peak, and his peak lasted for
Yeah.
even until when he was just like doing the self-titled solo artist stuff
Mm-hmm.
from Boogie Down Productions to KRS-One.
Yeah.
But the song Jimmy to me is it, of course it predates me, but
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those songs where if people want to talk about the hip hop canon and talk about HIV, talk about public health messaging, that song has to be a part of it. Um, just like Salt and Peppers, Let's Talk About Sex, I
Yep.
think you have to include Boogie Down Productions Jimmy. It
Yeah.
just has to be because it's when people were doing things that were gutsy, provocative, but also informative. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that a description we often don't provide for those artists. I would say loving. They put
Mm.
love in that, and they were lovingly putting that message out there. We don't know who was saved, including ourselves. We don't know who was informed, who was more empowered, who was more equipped, who was like, you know what? Let me hold up a bit. Let me
Yeah.
get that Jimmy. Let me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just equipping you to a beat.
Yes. It is so interesting that you talk about the love piece. So in 1988, I would have been 11. I was heading to middle school, or like already in middle school. So I was becoming keenly aware of masculine representation and how black men should show up in the world, right? Um, and you talk about the love piece because I think that's the part that's the you can't quantify or you can't qualify, right? Because there was something in that music, in that thing, right, where even me was able to see myself and be able to receive that message and recognize that it was coming from a place of love and education and be able to sit with it. And I think I was able to do that because of that love in the music piece. And it's that piece of black masculine expression that I think kind of captivates folks, but we don't often talk about it because we focus on all this other stuff. But you're right. There was love in that song too.
And if I could mention this also
Mm-hmm.
about Boogie Down Productions, and this might just be me assuming, and I'm sure DJ Kenny Parker would be able
Mm-hmm.
to validate this,
Shout out to
or
him too.
you
His
can ask
YouTube page
him.
is amazing. I
Um,
love those stories.
but one thing that I do think about when it comes to this song Jimmy and KRS-One's evolution from the first album to the second album. Yes, Scott
Mm-hmm.
LaRock, is passing. And I want to also throw in the name and lift her up in her memory, Miss
Miss
Melody,
Melody. Miss
because I think
Melody.
that I read somewhere about how Wu-Tang, as Wu-Tang, yeah, you had the 9 members and you had a bunch of guys walking around or like hanging around, but the presence of women brought a different consciousness into a
Mm-hmm.
room.
Yes.
And so what people were writing and how people were inspired, I think about that and think about how do you go from gun talk and just like the South Bronx and the bridges over and that really aggressive tone to easing back into that professorial teacher perspective that KRS-One had to give that message. And, you know, just to be a fly on the wall in that room. But I want to say, I have to think about Miss Melody and think about her impact, her
Yes.
influence to be a part of that. Also thinking about Self Destruction and
Yeah.
Heal and all these other projects that KRS-One was a part of.
Yo, taking a pause, you're absolutely right because the 2 years ago, the Universal Hip Hop Museum, which is still raising funds for their like museum. I don't know if you saw this. They had like a kind of a an example museum like that they want that you could get tickets and go through in the Bronx. And what was so dope in this space was the inclusion of women as as part of the foundation of hip hop. So as you're going through the museum, right, you are seeing these sisters who were part of these crews. They weren't out front, right? Many of them, but they were part of these crews. And so they would be in the picture and like, this is so and so and da da da. And she was either, a sister or dating so and so. And so she was part of the crew too. So there was always that energy
Mhm.
that was part of it. So thank you for lifting up Miss Melody. And also, we got to lift up Harmony real quick too.
Yep. Yep.
Yo, Harmony was part of BDP too. And yo, Pound Cake. Okay, folks, if you don't know Harmony's Pound Cake, go play it because it's dope and you'll dance. So go play that joint. So thank you for lifting up that energy being part of the
Yeah.
crew too. Um to that point about masculine representation, one of the other songs we wanted to lift up in this conversation came from Red Hot and Blue, which was the first Red Hot release for me, like changed everything. The moment, I promise you, the moment I saw Nina Cherry's I Got You Under My Skin video, I was like, this is possible. Like, you could do this.
Mhm.
And then, of course, on the record, we have the Jungle Brothers, I Get a Kick Out of You on there too. Um, and so Red Hot Blue, based on Cole Porter. I love that about those Red Hot releases too, especially those early years. I have Red Hot and Fela back here, which is on the newer side of that train. But um, the Jungle Brothers represented another expression of black masculinity in hip hop, right? So you so this song feels really different than Jimmy felt, but is no less impactful in its in the way I received it.
And when it comes to the Jungle Brothers are they remain unsung but so
Mm,
beloved. I would say the Jungle Brothers and Ultramagnetic MCs are the two groups that had so huge of an impact and an influence on hip hop. But I think sometimes those who write, those who have a chance to have the platform, who get to remember hip hop, somehow dismiss them or diminish
mm,
them or pass them by. But I have to say, the Jungle Brothers, they were exhibiting a form, expanded definition of masculinity, of black
mhm.
masculinities, while also Afrocentricity,
Yes.
including house influences. Because something that we
Yeah.
don't talk about, like the silent, quiet part about house, is that house. And I want to give a shout out to my man Oxygen for this, but
Mhm.
like house was this culmination of black, queer, straight, just gumbo,
It was
right?
a gumbo.
But you knew there was a black queer influence,
Mhm.
but you rock with it. It wasn't one of
Yes.
those things where you were like, I need to keep 10 feet away. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I'm gonna dance to this.
Mhm.
This was it was like so infectious that you had to dance to it. Excuse the pun, but like you had to go with it. You had to rock with it. And I think that the Jungle Brothers deserve so much credit. Um, because like even thinking about the red hot process to even be on the album,
Mhm.
somehow, some way, I'm guessing John Carlin and Lee Blake, who are the co-founders of Red Hot, reached out to them, at least to their management, and asked if you wanted to participate. and they gave a yay or nay, and they
Yeah.
gave the yay, and they went into the studio and made this song.
Yeah.
And when you think about Red Hot and Blue, especially that first album, it's a hodgepodge of who's hot in pop music. So you have everyone from
So Annie Lennox is on there.
yeah,
What is
Talking
it?
Heads.
Fine Young Cannibals, I think, is on it.
Yeah,
Talking Heads is
yeah.
on it.
Yeah, so you have so many people on that album to think like, yo, I want to contribute something to this album. And so if you listen to the whole album, you may not, especially if you go back to that year, you may not gravitate to every artist and every song, but if you're a hip hop head and you were coming from, I don't know, Latin Quarter or from that
Mhm.
from that era, you could look at the track listing and say, wait, Jungle Brothers are on this. I'm gonna listen to it because at least this one track, there's something that resonates with me, even if it's just the energy, the language, the vernacular.
Mm. And the fact that they were committed to raising awareness about HIV. It was not what I loved about Red Hot and Blue was that the message was clear about what this was going to do. And that's why I have been so always supportive of Red Hot and the work that happens. One, just the combination of the type of music that you get. I'm like, where else can you get all of these people on one record for one cause? And so yeah, so I get a kick out of you. The Jungle Brothers is a song that doesn't that I don't know that we lift up enough. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that joint. And another song um that often gets um kind of left out of the conversation around HIV is, Bone Thugs The Crossroads. So this song comes as a tribute to Eazy-E, who passed away in 1995. I think this song came out in 96. And becomes a huge hit. Really does introduce Bone Thugs to a national audience in so many ways. But this song is also just kind of an important entry into the conversation about hip hop raising awareness around HIV too.
Yeah.
And this song does a lot of different things as well because we get melodic hip hop for the first time. I think not the first time, but commercially, it hadn't happened really before them.
And I think it resonates with so many different people because it has a timelessness to it because they're reflecting, like they're in the studio and they're reflecting on their mentor Eazy-E
Yeah.
passing from HIV complications.
Mm-hmm.
And especially at that time and who Eazy-E was. Eazy-E was, he'd tell you,
Yes.
I'm a real MF and
Yes.
G.
Yes.
And everyone knew him from his from his NWA days as well as just solo Ruthless days.
Yeah.
And so they're in the studio mourning and grieving their mentor, but they're putting this song together. And then by the time the album comes out, people can just like they feel it. They
Yes.
feel it. And even for me, I had an Uncle Charles,
Mm-hmm.
and I miss my Uncle Charles, y'all.
Yeah.
And the song was always a good song, but it didn't hit until my Uncle Charles passed away. And now I'm thinking to myself, like,
Yes.
yeah, I miss my Uncle Charles, y'all.
Yeah.
And I have to say that song, it stays with you because even when the song was released, you're dealing with death. Even if it was just from the federal building in Oklahoma City and
Yes.
and seeing that, or losing a relative, a cousin, an uncle, whomever. And then every, of course, loss is ever present, death is ever present, but you're just constantly revisiting that song. And I'm so thankful to Bone Thugs and Harmony. I'm not the biggest Bone Thugs and Harmony fan,
Mm-hmm.
but I got a lot of love for black people in the Midwest, and I got a lot of love for black folks in Ohio, and I got a lot of love for people putting their heart into that music. And
Yes.
so even if I'm not the biggest Bone Thugs and Harmony fan, if any of those brothers ever came in my orbit, like, handshake length, I would shake their hand and say thank you.
Yes.
Because they put together something that was so magical. And I know so many people who are big fans. And
Mhm.
so I rock with them because they're so passionate about Bone Thugs, where I'm passionate about Wu-Tang and Mobb Deep. They're
Right.
passionate about Bone Thugs. And I'm like, all right, I understand. I understand.
um 95, hip hop actually experienced two losses related to HIV in 95. So of course Eazy-E was earlier in that year, and then we had DJ Sugar Shaft, who was from X Clan, who also died in 1995, and that's a name that doesn't also often get lifted up as well. And um you know, coming into 96, we were familiar with seeing the red ribbons at the award shows. Which I loved too, right? Because you really got the opportunity to see people um, honoring folks, raising awareness, etc. Um, but one of the other really dope things that happened in 1996 is Red Hot's, uh, which was the first Red Hot. Well, not the first, because there was like the grunge one. I don't think had like a Red Hot. I think it was like another name.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but so this is one of the few Red Hot releases that was like not Red Hot and something, right?
Mhm.
But we get America's Dying Slowly comes out, which is a star-studded hip hop album. New and established artists are on the record, all to raise awareness around HIV. And the record is so interesting to me because you get all the facets of conversations around HIV. So you get conspiracy theories, you get love and intimacy, you get substance use. There's all Every artist kind of tackles this subject in their own way.
Yep.
And us as the listener, or me as the listener, got the opportunity to, and I'm now going in and volunteering in my first volunteer gig because I graduated from high school and I started volunteering at the Chester AIDS Coalition in 96. So I am also kind of out there in community as well, having these conversations. But I got to take this album in and explore all of these different narratives that were happening, but all for the same cause.
Mhm.
Can you talk to the folks who may be unfamiliar a bit about America is Dying Slowly?
Yeah, sure, sure. And before we get into America's Dying Slowly, Red Hot put out an album, long titles, and it's been a long day, but Stolen Moments. I normally
Mm-hmm.
just call it Stolen Moments, but it was a hip hop meets jazz compilation album. So it was similar to like a
I don't think I know
Jazzmatazz
that
and
one.
Guru.
What?
Yeah, so it's like you have Pharoah Sanders, you have the Last Poets, you have Michelle Ndegeocello, you have Farside, you have the Roots. So check that album out. The
Oh,
cover is Pharoah
MG.
Sanders, his beard.
Uh,
But yeah, so they made that attempt, but it was touching a certain audience, and so they were still trying to get into more people getting involved through, with hip hop. And it was apparently, from some of the reporting that I did, it was Eazy-E's death that was what generated people's interest in actually participating, because Eazy-E and who Eazy-E was. And so up until that point, Stolen Moments really represents the bohemian side of hip hop.
mhm.
You like, the far
Yeah,
side, and
yeah,
and
because
so MC
Guru's
Solar
Jazzmatazz would
from
have been
Paris.
happening then, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And so when they were able to get Common and Mobb Deep and Chubb Rock, Biz Markie, Coolio, so many people on that
Uh,
album. Lost Boys, I'm a big Lost Boys fan.
yeah,
Pete
Goody
Rock,
Mob is on there with Blood is on there
yeah,
with Goody Mob. Yo, one of the
and that's the
dopest
full
track.
length Blood.
That
Because
is
if
a
you listen to that, the Soul Food album, it's just a snippet.
absolutely. And so, yeah, because Big Rube is on it. Get shout out to Big Rube too, and oh man, Organized Confusion, all of that. So yeah,
Decision.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That record is wow.
And so they were putting the album together, and essentially it seems as if it was like Loud Records, the famed New York record
Mhm.
label. It was like a lot of loud artists with West Coast artists,
Mhm.
with South artists, and it was a very US nationwide type of album. Coolio has a song on there, and he already had a song called Too Hot, which was like
Mhm.
a relatively big hit for him,
Yep.
doing HIV awareness.
Mhm.
And then you have people like Mobb Deep on there. You have Organized Confusion, their song
Mhm.
Decisions.
Yeah.
I had a chance to interview Pharoah Monch about participating on that album, as well as Timo from
Mhm.
Goody Mob, and just having a chance to talk to people about that album. It seems like everybody was impacted in their own pockets of the US. So going back to, it was a nationwide experience. So Pharoah Monch is in Queens, New York, and
Mhm.
Timo's in Atlanta. But
Mhm.
they're seeing HIV from different angles, but it's HIV and it's affecting people that look like them, maybe people that are close to them, people in their communities. And they're saying, yo, next time I go in the studio, I'm gonna pen a verse, and then Prince
Yes.
Poe is going to is going to pen a verse, or then
Mhm.
CeeLo is going to pen a verse, and we're just going to put this together. Big Rube is going to go and
Mhm.
he's going to do his spoken word on this, and we're going to make sure that people are informed. And then the two executive producers, they're putting their heads together to curate this experience. And I don't know if you've seen it, but they did like a live concert on
Yeah.
MTV as a promotional tool where Coolio hosted.
Yeah.
Rest in peace of Coolio.
Yeah.
It's so wild. There's so many hip hop legends you have to
And
say R.I.P. to.
it yes.
But he's hosting it, and they have performances by De La Soul, Wu-Tang
Mhm.
Clan, Goody Mob, and others, to get the promotion out to say that America is dying slowly. And if you look at it, the acronym spells out AIDS.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if it's the reverse acronym, but like,
Mhm. Mhm.
America is dying slowly. And to me, that album was so influential. It came out when I was 11 years old, and I would just listen to the songs, especially the Yearn with Lost Boys
Yeah.
and Pete Rock.
Mhm.
I'm a big Lost Boys fan. My brother and I still share, that Mr. Cheeks Freaky
Yeah.
Tide dance. We still do that. And we're listening to the song, but we're listening to it out of context. So you're watching the video, you see them, you're like, I don't know what that is. You're like, is that photography film? Or
Mhm.
you later find out that's condoms, condom
Yeah.
wrappers that
Yeah.
they're just kind of dangling, like whatever. But
Yeah.
then Mr. Cheek says, protect yourself. That
Mhm.
shows that you respect yourself.
Yeah.
Now I know the words, and I'm going with the melody, and I'm just repeating that to myself at 11 years old. I don't know.
Listen.
So do I wear an oven mitt? Do I wear a
Right.
condom? I don't know. Do I wear a football helmet? I protect myself because I respect myself.
But that message though,
Yeah,
like the message of, but you internalize it, right? And
yeah,
then as you grow and as you have life and experience, then you like, oh,
yeah.
that's what they were talking about.
And because of that impact of that album that came out in 1996, when I'm 11 years old, or about to be 11 years old, when I decided that I wanted to go to grad school and get a master's in public health, I wrote my graduate application on that album,
Yeah.
because I felt like if anybody was going to apply for this MPH position or MPH school program, they're not coming in with the same dimensions and the same character that I'm coming into it with. They're coming in from, like, they did really well in biology and they wanted to do pre-med and all of that. No,
Mhm.
I'm a journalist. I am a historian. I am a public history type of guy.
Yes.
But I wanted to do something in the health realm because I had a chance to work or volunteer at a free clinic. And I was like, I need to do something with health, at least for the time being. But what do I bring uniquely? I bring America's Dying Slowly. I
Yes.
bring the words of Mr. Cheeks and Pete Rock. I bring the words of Prodigy. I
Mhm.
bring, the words that I'm hearing from Killer Priest and
Mhm.
RZA.
Yeah.
And so even if there is some conspiracy theory, even if there's some slut shaming, even if
Mhm.
there is like some maybe inaccurate information, people's hearts were in the right place. And they wanted to inform their community. They wanted to equip those young Black folks, young Black minds, and the fans of hip hop.
Mhm.
And even if hip hop was expanding past just Black people,
Mhm.
they knew that they wanted to represent for their communities. Like I said, they were all being impacted wherever they were, geographically, and said, I want to make a song. I want to contribute this song. And I want to make sure that Red Hot puts this out. And then I'm going to participate in the promotion.
Yeah.
And just to think about, especially at that time, Red Hot wasn't dealing with some huge budget.
Right.
And people still wanted to participate. And so I give props constantly. So even if you listen to the album now, which I definitely encourage,
Please
America's Dying Slowly, even if you're like, this part kind of cringe, or this part this might seem appropriate, remember the historical context, and remember that people were putting their hearts in the right place. And because of that, every artist, every person who participated, from the executive producers to Red Hot to everybody, I take my hat off and salute them constantly.
One of the things that hip hop taught me, and I learned this early, as a fan of Ice Cube, as a Black queer boy who was a fan of Ice Cube, you had to learn this early. You gotta filter the things, right? Like you learn to do that thing, right? To be like, oh, okay, I could take the bitter with the sweet. I'd be like, okay, that part, no, but this right here, yes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And with America is Dying Slowly, when you even listen today, and y'all, this is about 30 years ago. So folks who do listen recognize that the conversation was very different in the early 1990s. And of course 1996 becomes a really important year when we get the cocktail originally shows up. Protease inhibitors begin to show up in 1996, but we were having a very different conversation that year. So but you mentioned the RZA. So Wu-Tang has a song on here that people forget. I'd be like, y'all know Wu-Tang has a full out song raising awareness about HIV, and it is called America.
Yes.
And you highlighted that song as, I'm like, oh, is there a list of songs you want to highlight? And you were like, I want to highlight America by Wu-Tang. Why do you want to highlight that song?
I'm a big Wu-Tang fan. Love Wu-Tang. I even have a Wu-Tang tattoo.
You do?
It's a collage of my favorite music. So from Gil Scott-Heron, Wu-Tang, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest,
Shout out to Gil Scott-Heron is back there too.
And when it comes to America, it was like almost, it's not the whole Wu-Tang that's on it. But
that would be it's already a 6 minute song. It would be 20 minutes if everybody was on it.
But you have let's run it down. You have Killer Priest, you have Raekwon, you have RZA, you have Inspector Deck. I mean, you have a solid
RZA
base.
is on it too, I think.
RZA?
RZA's definitely, but is GZA on it? I think GZA's on it.
I don't think
he's
GZA's
not on it.
Okay. Oh, Master Killer.
Master Killer is on it.
And so that song is just like great because you have so many Wu-Tang members on the song. The chorus, I think, kind of sets it up. I mean, not only the title, but to me, it feels like the title track or the unofficial title track of America's Dying Slowly. It's like the centerpiece of it.
I wonder what came first. I was like, did the song come first or did the title come first? And they said, here's going to be the title. So
I'm imagining that Master Killer came up with the album title, because if you listen to the end of, I want to say, The Yearn with Pete Rock and Lost Boys going into America, Master Killer is speaking, and it's like a quick snippet, and he's like, you can flip AIDS two different ways, and it was like, America's dying slow. He's like, America's dying, or a law is divine. So I guess you say, just take the S out.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that Master Killer probably was influential in coming up with that title. And then it was like, that makes sense.
Yes.
But one thing that Wu-Tang also should get credit for is that Wu-Tang consistently, even from their first single, has talked about HIV. The first single was Protect Your Neck, and then on the
Yo,
B-side, Tears.
you're
Ghostface's
right. Yeah.
verse is about HIV. Then on the
I
Wu,
wow.
yeah. And then on the Wu-Tang Forever album, Ghostface on the song Projects,
Mhm.
he's talking about a sexcapade. And then at the end, he's like, the condom broke. And then he's
Mhm.
asking questions. And
Yes.
so Wu-Tang has consistently talked about HIV, has consistently talked about or consistently provided social commentary. And then part of that social commentary includes HIV. And so having that conversation, thinking about America's Dying Slowly, looking at the song America, that's the centerpiece, but also looking at other songs, other albums. And then later on, I keep on talking about Ghostface.
Mhm.
But when the Pharma Bro was like upping the meds, you remember that story?
Yeah, and he bought he bought that one Wu-Tang record in
Yeah,
like the
Once Upon a
gold
Time.
box or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Right?
So when
Once
he
upon a
bought that
time in
out,
Shaolin.
yeah, he bought that album, and it was Ghostface who confronted him about it
Yes.
and did a video, and he was talking about like, why are you charging people an arm and a leg for medicine? And
Mm.
so Wu-Tang has consistently talked about health, consistently talked about trying to inform people and, as they say, teach the babies.
Yeah.
And for me, I was one of those babies. So I
Yes.
credit Wu-Tang for consistently doing that good work.
Yeah, man. So 1996 um becomes a year where, well, following 96, right, it starts to trickle, right? Red Hot is obviously still happening. There are so many dope Red Hot releases, you know, post that too. But in pop culture is shifting tremendously, and by the 2000s it's like a whole different ball game, you know what I mean? But I'm beginning to reflect on today. We are Us as black men are redefining how the world see us. We are not these one note uh, individuals. We are complex, and we deserve to be seen in our fullness. Right? I
Yeah.
am wondering, because I think it's necessary. I actually think hip hop should be more vocal in the conversation around HIV at all different levels of hip hop, commercially, everywhere.
Yeah.
Wherever there is hip hop, every rapper needs to be having some sort of conversation, in my opinion, about HIV and other things that we have happening within our communities.
Yeah.
Do you think that the evolution of black masculinity in these conversations that we're having maybe will give rappers more room to have some of these conversations today? What are your thoughts on where we are?
I think that hip hop has expanded so much that I think that people are already talking about HIV, already talking about um, so many different subjects, but will they get to our ear? Will they get to our
Mm-hmm.
streams? Will they get to our phones and our record players? I have some doubts about that. But I think that there are a lot of, especially like black queer rappers,
Mm-hmm.
MCs who are touching on those topics and really giving you some substance. Um, but I do have questions about the hip hop luminaries, the legends, the ones that we often will name and like, yo, who's putting out music, and then we
Mm-hmm.
name the top five, the Jay-Z, the
Yeah.
Nas, and whomever. And I think even like to Nas's credit, Nas has spoken about HIV,
Mm-hmm.
but I also want to remember that he talked about it in a way, it was also more than 20 years ago. Maybe not his brightest moment,
Mm-hmm.
Ike with the Iverson jersey,
Mm-hmm.
but there was some sort of reference that you can go back for historical context. I don't know if hip hop is preparing themselves, equipping themselves to talk about what's going on currently. One of my biggest gripes has been that hip hop that we often will have easy access to is not talking about the topics um that are hitting home. You know,
Yeah.
essentially they're not talking about those dinner table
Mm-hmm.
topics. A lot of it is, you know, material items and wealth and just that showmanship, that upmanship. And that may not be what we need, but they're providing us with some sort of entertainment. But I am curious about what other health issues beyond HIV or
Mm-hmm.
that might intersect with HIV. I would love for people to talk more about Black maternal mortality. I would love to
Yes.
talk about just like Black pregnant people
Yes.
and PrEP. You know,
Yes.
I would love to see and hear some campaigns about people doing PrEP. What about mammograms? What
Mm-hmm.
about prostate cancer screenings? Blood
All
pressure,
the
high
diabetes,
cholesterol,
all of the abs yes.
diabetes, you know.
Yes, you are absolutely right. I think it's necessary. And and honestly, I think if hip hop has if hip hop culture and those who are kind of operating within it, I'm thinking from the artists to the DJs to everybody, right? These are conversations like we have to rekindle that activist spirit
Mhm.
because we need it. Like there are, especially now with we see all of these programs going away. We see, you can't talk about this in the schools anymore, so therefore it is going to get more and more and more challenging to get information.
Mhm.
um so we need some of our folks to step up and learn and share.
And if I could add something to that,
Please.
I think because my man Tim Hotep mentioned this to me, and I was like, yeah, that that makes sense.
Hmm.
And that is back in '96 when people were recording America's Dying Slowly. Um, there was maybe a greater opportunity for artists to be connected with grassroots organizations.
Hmm.
Now, maybe not so much, but I think that the music will reflect the proximity that artists have to organizations that are doing that work. And so if you have someone who's in X rappers camp who has a public health
Hmm.
background, who's talking about screenings, you might get something.
Yeah.
And I would love for us to hear music and hear that creativity before we have to deal with loss.
Yes.
You know, can we deal with it on a more preemptive, intentional, deliberate way rather than saying, "Yo, so and so just passed, and now
Yes.
let's talk about it."
Yeah. um I think you answered uh my final question. I do think there is an opportunity, to your point, for hip hop to rekindle its activist spirit. I think it's there. I also love this idea that you just lifted up too about um, proximity to folks camps. Right? We've talked a lot about that, and we are in a space. We exist in a time where I do think it's hard for folks to connect with one another. We just don't do it the same way. Like we're in these boxes a lot, but we're alone in our homes on these boxes, and it's just a different thing. You know what I mean? So I do think there is an opportunity. um Before we end tonight's conversation, we talked offline about lifting up another name that we have not I have not seen this conversation raised up, and I feel like we need to send some love, or lift up the name of Craig Mack.
Mhm.
So Rolling Stone did a wonderful um, article on Craig Mack, kind of chronicling his last few years of life. It is really well reported, and pretty detailed. And one of the details, it's like buried in the middle of the article, is a paragraph revealing that the death certificate for Craig Mack revealed that he died of HIV related complications, which I don't think anyone out, I don't think anyone knew, right? I don't even know if his family knew. I think that was part of the article too. But so we wanted to spend a second just lifting up Craig Mack's name, um, another hip hop pioneer, um, and also just saying again, like this is it's a necessary conversation to have in our
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. Rest in peace to Craig Mack. Just an amazing contributor to hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people know Craig Mack from his like Bad Boy days,
Mm-hmm.
but um, previously when he was on, I think it was like Fresh Records, MC Easy and Troop. So those early days,
Yeah.
and it's definitely unfortunate. One thing that I think about, and I don't know if the article mentioned this, around him not wanting to be in care.
Mm-hmm.
Craig Mack, I believe, is his government name. And when we think about stigma, if
Mm-hmm.
you're in a if you if you're in the doctor's office or you haven't been in the doctor's office, um, your name is going to get called.
Yes.
And if you had a number one hit, Flavor in Your Ear, and it had a remix, and you had a
Yes.
feature on Mary J. Blige, and you
Mm.
had some notoriety, you had Jock in My Style.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a fan.
Yes.
Rest in peace. Um, then you may not feel comfortable going to a
Mm-hmm.
doctor's office, even if you left New York, and saying, "Hey, I'm Craig Mack, and I'm living with HIV." And I don't know what type of support he had,
Mm-hmm.
but I do want to at least, of course, lift his name up and ask the question, challenge ourselves that if someone in our lives currently is living with HIV, will they feel comfortable coming to us? Will they
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable seeking us out for resources? Are we availing ourselves with that information, with that know-how, with that expertise to say, hey, I'm here. I'm
Yes.
present. Um, and then another thing about hip hop and another thing about the music industry is the lack of health insurance.
Yes.
And so you're like this independent contractor, and you might make a hit or two for the labels and make a bunch of money for other people who did not make the
Mm-hmm.
song, but you yourself, as the creative, as the artist, what happens when you need health insurance and you need health care? Um, So I think that's something to really think about.
Yes. We have to make sure, and I know that there are organizations that are beginning to emerge now, which is great. Just kind of being able to look at being able to provide services, right, to folks that have been pivotal in the culture, and so. But you're absolutely right. Um, this has been a multifaceted conversation, brother. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely appreciated. And thank you all for joining us for this World AIDS Day conversation where we wanted to talk a bit about hip hop, the decade 1986 to 1996, covering some amazing art, and just talking about the work that so many dope artists have done over the years. So, Stephen Hicks, thank you for joining us on The Reckoning.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I give some shout outs?
Of course you can.
I wanna, he recently passed. I want to give a big shout out to Cornelius Baker,
Ah, yes.
a giant. I
Mhm,
want to give a shout out, recipes to Ka,
mhm.
Brownsville Ka, um, and just like so many different people. Not only for World AIDS Day, but just folks that we've lost more recently. But of
Yeah.
course, because it's World AIDS Day, I definitely want to lift up folks who are living with HIV, who are thriving, who have passed, everyone who has contributed in any sort of way, in a positive way, in a healthy way, for us to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. For all of you who are joining us, please subscribe wherever you are. Please be sure to follow CMP at CMP Tribe on all of your social media platforms. And we will see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Reckoning, y'all. Peace.
Peace.